Hi, welcome to Kill the Cat. In this episode, we're discussing the 2001 Disney animated adventure Atlantis and how it makes use of a unique cast of memorable side characters to enhance story, plot, and theme. As always, spoilers ahead, but otherwise, enjoy the episode. Welcome to Kill the Cat. We are talking about Atlantis today. This one is a film that I think we're both going back to after about 20 years.
That's scary, don't say that.
This is very scary. There's a lot of nostalgia attached to this film, I think, for both of us. This was a favorite when I was a kid. I related to Milo because I had glasses and I was a bit of a nerd, and he had glasses and was a massive nerd. But also, just the genre for me was probably a favorite. I just read Journey to the Center of the Earth around the same time as this came out. Treasure Planet was another movie that came out around the same time that I really loved.
Yeah, that's my favorite Disney movie.
Yeah.
I promise I'm not trying to be special by listing an obscure Disney movie as my favorite. It's steampunk, and I'm super into steampunk, so Treasure Planet, Atlantis. There was also 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I don't know if that's Disney, but there's definitely a great animated version of that out there, which I think started my steampunk obsession. There's not enough good steampunk content.
No, or it's there's not enough high budget, well-made steampunk.
And then Peter Jackson had the chance to do Mortal Engines.
Did you ever watch that?
I did not. I loved the books, though.
Okay.
When I was a kid. I'm not going to blame Peter Jackson for that because, there was a lot of stuff going on that wasn't his fault. But he did have a good steampunk movie, and it's Atlantis, and that's the one we're actually going to talk about.
Yeah.
So
From the top, it is probably worth mentioning there are some problematic things in this movie. It is very, very white saviory. It's very easy to make those arguments. The Atlanteans don't really have any agency in their own rescue or in the preservation of their own culture. Milo has to teach them how to read their own language, despite the fact that most of them were around when the city sunk, so they should have all known how to speak the language. That's at the time. True. That just doesn't really make sense. To its credit, I think its sort of anti-imperial message holds up maybe a little bit better now that we're a bit more educated about that kind of stuff as a general population. So I feel like some of the broader themes, they still hold up really well. So we're not going to talk about the problematic elements in this movie because plenty of people already have, and we're both white. So
yeah. So we want to acknowledge it's there and then dive into, some more academic about how to write side characters. But we do acknowledge that those problems are there in this movie.
So yes, side characters.
Side characters.
What are we talking about today, Kat?
Okay, so I was inspired, lockdown of last year actually, I decided to rewatch all the Marvel movies in order of release. And this was also the time that I was reading a lot of Marvel fan fiction, and my brain went, why isn't there a lot of fic about the Warriors 3 from Thor and the Howling Commandos from Captain America? And even when the Warriors 3 never show up in fic, almost ever, and when the Howling Commandos do show up, it's generally more of a Steve and Bucky story set during the war, and they just happen to be there.
So I'm going to be real honest. Until you mentioned it, I had forgotten the Warriors 3 existed, and I had forgotten that the Howling Commandos existed.
The Warriors 3 get straight up killed off in Thor Ragnarok, and it's not even sad, and Thor doesn't even acknowledge that his 3 best friends essentially just got killed. It's just not there at all. So we decided to have a look at a movie that did have really memorable side characters, and Atlantis came to mind. Even though many people saw this as a kid, they still remember a lot of side characters. There's a lot of fan castings for these side characters.
Yeah. Going back, as a more mature movie watcher, I definitely feel the pace of this film. It's really quick, and they just kind of get through things without a lot of struggle. And when you hear,
it's that super easy, barely an inconvenience.
Exactly. But the original script was 150 something pages.
155 pages.
Yeah, and they cut it down to a 90-minute type movie.
A lot of the original script was just them getting to Atlantis, and then the filmmakers were like, this is a movie about Atlantis, and we don't get there. True. They actually originally had a different opening scene, which was more about Vikings and setting up the mythology, and then they had a story consultant come in and said, we don't see Atlantis for maybe 30 to 40 minutes into this movie, and it makes it really hard to care about the stakes of the film. It makes it really hard to care about Kida. So he suggested instead replacing that opening scene, which was like shot and they'd spent a lot of money on, with Kida as a little girl. To give us some connection to her and her people before the movie started.
Which I think is good. I feel like coming back, I'm like, I can tell there was a lot cut out. Like,
yeah.
I wanted to spend more time just like with them dealing with the Leviathan, with them dealing with the sort of trials of getting to Atlantis itself. Coming back to it though, like I remembered almost all of the side characters. And this is 20 years on. I'm like, I remembered Sweet, I remembered Audrey, I remembered Vinnie, and I remembered Moliere. I had forgotten about Mrs. Packard and Cookie.
Yeah, they're not quite as prominent as the other ones. Audrey was my jam when I was a little girl. Like,
that is no surprise to me.
Yes, that line where she's like, my dad wanted 2 sons. He wanted like a mechanic and
a boxer.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, and my sister's off like winning a medal right now.
Yeah, she's like 24-0 and has a shot at the championship next week.
Which as a little girl, that was everything. Yeah. And these are really beloved characters. Like we said, there's a lot of fan casting for them. Terry Crews for Dr. Sweet is a really common one. More recently, people have been talking about Tom Holland to play Milo Thatch.
Which I only saw that the other day and I was like, yeah,
that's a solid choice.
I'm like, yeah, he's never someone I would have picked. But as soon as you say it, I'm like, yeah.
He's got that kind of like dorky energy.
He's massive dorky energy.
Yeah.
I feel like you could put Zendaya in as Kida and just keep them together forever.
We did talk about Stephanie Beatrice as Audrey, even though she's probably too old.
At this point, but
if you could time travel and get like teenage Stephanie Beatrice and put her in there, that would be awesome.
Yeah. No, but yeah, these characters do really well at just sticking in your brain. And there's a few reasons for that, and that's what we wanted to talk about today. Do we want to touch on, though, like, what do we mean when we say support characters?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we're not talking about love interests, so we're not really going to talk about Kida. We're not talking about villains, so we're not really going to talk about Rourke. Or we're not really talking about sidekicks. So these are more like a crew, supporting characters. I had other ideas of like great ones would be, for example, the cast of Toy Story.
Yeah.
With Rex and Slinky and stuff, like we consider them support characters.
Yeah. So one of the things that Atlantis has really working for it is kind of the lost 60 pages of character development that would have been in the initial Act 1 and 2 that, really would have set up the characters for the actors, for the animators, for the directors and producers. And that's a really important part of having good support characters, is just knowing who they are. But even more than that is the uniqueness of each character is what makes them stand out and be memorable. So when you look at the Howling Commandos, they're all soldiers in the same uniform. They don't really do anything except all together. I think they do
all have their unique skill. We just don't really get to see them. Like, I think one is explosives. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I should know.
We can't remember, right?
But I don't remember what each of them... and in the comics, and if you're a fan of the comics, I'm sure it's there. It just we're talking about the live action adaptation. Yeah.
But the Warriors 3 as well, it's just like, okay, here's 3 badass warriors. And
one of them is Chuck from the show Chuck.
One of them's a lady.
Oh, Lady Sith. I was like, oh yeah, no, I do remember her. And when she showed up in Loki and she's been in like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, Lady Sith. I liked her a lot.
Yeah.
Just not the other 3.
So there's 3 things for me that kind of really stood out as making these characters unique. And I'm going to separate those areas. For the first one is visual design of each of the characters. Given that it's a Disney animated movie, I think this is something they've always done really well with their characters. Sweet is this big, strong guy. He stands about a foot taller than everyone else in the group. You've got Vinnie is this kind of stiff character to design. Like, it's a lot of straight lines. Like, the top of his head is very straight. His haircut is kind of very straight.
Yeah, they designed him after a turtle. Like, that was their reference when designing Vinnie. He's a turtle.
A turtle?
Yes.
There you go. He often also then has like gadgets in his hands and a matchstick in his mouth. You've got Audrey, who is like always chewing gum and has overalls, and she's a mechanic with attitude. That's, her character in physical form. And then you have Moliere, who's the short, round mole man.
Yeah, I had him, he's more of a pet. Like their little pet than a character. And he's like the most cartoony and like super over the top, but there's only one, which works. If they were all at like Moliere's level of like ridiculousness, I think it would be far too much. But
I think that's also really important as well for the group in terms of a way for them to bond. He plays a really... I didn't have a good way to phrase this. I put it as scapegoat, but that's not the term. But the idea is that like Moliere constantly, he's like, just being weird. And the rest of the group kind of get to bond over like, oh, that's Moliere being weird. Like,
yeah, he's the only one without a backstory because Vinnie's like, you just don't want to know.
Yeah, you shouldn't have told me, but you did. And now I'm telling you, you don't want to know. But yeah, they then also have really unique personalities. So like Sweet is really friendly and caring, and he's kind of the leader of these supporting characters. And the fact that he is so caring kind of contrasts with his size and his stature.
He is Terry Crews, essentially.
Basically. But he's the one that suggests bringing Milo over when they're like, we should cut him some slack, and they invite him over for dinner. He's technically the first of the supporting characters to go against Rock. When there's the confrontation, it's Audrey who steps out of the car first. But that's only because Sweet has stayed behind to look after the king, who the Rock has just punched.
That's so true.
And then he's also, warns Milo about not wanting to know Moliere's story. And then you've got Vinnie, who's like really got this dry wit to him, and he likes to mess with Milo, and he's like, oh, I built a bridge. Only took me, 10 seconds? And the nitroglycerin is like, did you just drink that?
I had in my notes, he's so casual, but he's the explosives expert, which is the person who should not be casual about anything.
But that's another one of those contrasts that really works, right?
Yeah, a lot of contrast. As well when Sweet's character design, they were like, we're going to make him have really quick, fast movements, even though he's like the biggest character. And you see that like in the introduction where he's doing like the really over the top like medical rundown of Milo and fixing his neck and stuff. Yeah.
One of Vinny's other lines I love is like, you got something more sporty, like a tuna? It's just like, he's so silly. And then you got Audrey, who's personality-wise, like she's this incredibly gifted mechanic, and she's the youngest of the group by a long way. Like she's still a teenager, but she's also then the first one in the confrontation who like gets out of the car and goes to be with Milo. And then you also mentioned like there's her backstory of like, her dad wanted sons, so cool. And she's just like...
I also had her like proper intro, like where we really get to meet her, is her running to try and save the submarine. Like that's the first like really like Audrey moment we get. I also really liked that we met these characters very briefly as photographs and files.
Yeah.
And like the opening scenes. So we kind of got a sense, and even when Audrey, they're like, don't be surprised by her age, even though we haven't met this person yet.
We know that she's going to be really competent and skilled.
Yes.
Yeah. And then she's like this one single-handedly basically saving the sub, even though it does go down. But, if anyone was going to save it, it was Audrey.
Definitely Audrey. And then we have the other two, who is Mrs. Packard, who's the grumpy grandma who's always smoking, and Cookie. He's the least used character, but he's there, he's fun.
Yeah. He has a couple of notes that he hits, and that's kind of his thing. Moliere, as well, we said, is the sort of cartoony character, and that's kind of his whole personality. Like, he's a prankster, but I think he's a prankster in a different way to Vinnie. Moliere doesn't really get, like, he puts the, like, fart cushion under Milo when he sits down. It is like his jokes don't really land with the group as much.
But they land for him, and he enjoys them.
Yeah, and that's all that matters.
I have in my notes that we meet him goggles first.
Yes.
Like, little pointed goggles come out first.
That's another really great element of his character design, though. His visual design is the goggles, because they're just like,
they do
they're so expressive.
They're almost like a Spider-Man mask. They just show off so much, emotion and expression.
Yeah. The other thing that this movie does really well, and I think as D&D players, we love this, is that there's backstory for each of the characters, but not only is there backstory, we actually get to spend a moment going through each of their backstories and that connecting them to Milo.
Oh, I just had a thought. Compare that to Suicide Squad, not the Suicide Squad, the first one, where they just like put text on a screen. Like straight up and like expected you to remember all that information.
And spent like, how long was it? It's like 45 minutes before we finished the character intros. And it's like, you could have done that way better.
Like this movie does.
Yeah. Maybe have them all meet and then they can talk about why they're there on the way to something, or, you know.
And we talk about the ignorant protagonist, and Milo's definitely like the outsider. He doesn't really know these people. These people are already a group.
Yeah.
Milo's the outsider and he needs to prove himself to them. Which is relatable because I think we've all been in situations where like we're the new person and everyone already knows each other and there's inside jokes, and it's nice to see like Milo get to bond and them slowly accepting him as he like shows that he is really competent and can get them through all the struggles, even though we say they get through them really easily.
And like these backstories are kind of that turning point for Milo, right? He gets invited to sit with them for dinner and they go into backstories. In terms of backstory, like you've got Sweet, he's African American, Native American. He spent time living with his mother's tribe, and that's where he learned medicine. And then he went to med school and got drafted into the army. You got Vinnie, who worked in a flower shop, which is just this, again, I remembered that 20 years later because it's so contrasted to what we see of him as a demolitions man, but it's still believable for him and it sticks.
And it wasn't played as a joke.
No.
This is something I'm just brain thought now, but like, I guess the thing that I'd be like, oh, funny, he's an exploit, but he works in a flower shop. But it's not played for a joke, it's played sincerely. And I think because of that, the moment they say it, I'm like, yes, that fits this character, even though it's so left
He
field.
doesn't want to say it initially. He's like, I just like explosives. And Sweet comes to him and says, no, tell him the truth, right? And he tells the story of like, he was working in a flower shop with his family. The laundry next door exploded and suddenly his love of explosions was birthed from that moment.
Which is amazing. And that all sets up their goals. We don't know that yet. But later when they're like, Milo's like, oh, but we want to get to Atlantis, right? And they're like, no, it's about money. Again, that's kind of played for like a joke there. Yeah. Like they've told a joke, but you get there like, and like, oh, they're literally just here for the money. But we all understand, for example, like Vinnie wants a new flower shop, etc. Audrey wants to help her dad with the garage. Like
wants to reopen, the garage.
Like we understand like why they need this money. And it's for reasons that endeared us to them as characters. Which I think it really makes that betrayal hurt so much. And I think, that's why it's so important to like spend the time with these characters and see Milo bonding with them and see him slowly get accepted by them because they betray him. And out. Big oof.
But then there's also the, and this is kind of our next point, but they really support the plot. And that's something that's so important for support characters. If you're just going to have them in there for, there's like a MacGuffin, so the main character has somewhere to go or something to do, you're kind of not really using your support characters well. Each of these support characters does something in the first act, and then in the second, and sets up something for the third act. So, like, Audrey's the one saving the submarine. Vinnie gets the group across with the explosions. Moliere sets up the threat of the volcano, and he's like, this could blow at any point. Sweet is important for bringing Milo into the group and kind of being that initial connection point between Milo and the rest of the group.
Yeah, I had in my notes, if you take a single character out of this movie doesn't happen. So that's how instrumental they are to this movie.
And that also, I think, makes sense because of how much is cut from the movie. Like, they've had to make it so tight that, you pull one thread and it's going to be connected to all the other threads. But that conversation about their backstories is then really important for Milo confronting them when they go to take Kida and leave, right? Yeah,
because he's like, I know all of you, and you really feel like he has like properly connected with all of them.
But when he makes the argument, it's, he addresses each of them specifically. He's like, I hope you really enjoy that second garage. I hope you enjoy that flower shop. And it stings for them, and they make the choice to reconsider their actions.
And part of that is they give Milo one-on-one scenes with them. Like, for example, it's 2 for flinching. That's Audrey's thing with Milo. She goes to punch him, he flinches, and then she punches him twice, because two for flinching. Sweet fixes his neck in the beginning, or like, hey, look, I built a bridge, took me like 10 seconds thing.
The nitroglycerin with both Mole Man and, I call him Mole Man, it's Moliev.
I mean, it fits.
He is a trope.
And I actually thought back to Howling Commandos, and I'm like, Steve doesn't really get any one-on-one time with any of them. They're just kind of there as a group. They get lines and stuff, they interact, but you don't feel there's a one-on-one connection with any of those people. It's a little bit of an unfair analysis because, like, comparison, I should say, because in Atlantis, the characters are there for the entire movie. Howling Commandos are not, and neither are the Warriors 3. And look, the fandom loves Darcy Lewis. They took her and ran with her. But yeah, just to say, it's not completely a fair analysis, but it is useful to compare to drive our points home about Atlantis. And then the other little thing I really liked is they had little asides for these characters just doing their own thing. So when Milo was going about his business in Atlantis, we just get moments of like them going through the markets, them being in the throne room. They're so quick. They're not sketches. They're not comedy bits. No. We just see them for a couple of seconds having a life outside of the protagonist. And I just think it goes such a long way.
I think that's something that animation can do really well. I think that's much more difficult to do in live action because of production constraints. Like, if you want to have someone in the background for a shot doing something else while your main characters are talking, it's like, you can animate that easily. You're just drawing an extra character. But if you want to do a live performance, you've got to time that performance with the main character's performance. You've got to make sure it's not too distracting, but is obvious enough to see it. And it's just, I love it when I see it in live action, but it's not easy to do. And
yeah, those actors are really expensive. One of our notes we had is, I can't really tell you who the voice actors are for any of these side characters in Atlantis. They're all great voice actors, but we don't remember and love them because they're like a famous celebrity.
No, we remember them.
You know?
Yeah, we remember them because of the character design.
Yeah.
Visual and personality and backstory and how they interplay.
And theme.
Yeah. So the last point I would make is, so, you know, they have unique designs, they support the plot, but they also support theme. One of the major themes that this film tries to drive home is the idea of protecting other cultures rather than just destroying them for our own financial benefit. Milo, as the protagonist, always has the view of protecting them and admiring them, especially then as a linguist and someone who's spent time studying other cultures. Rourke is the opposite to that. As the antagonist, is purely self-interested. You know, he says, you know, if we returned everything we ever stole, museums would be empty. He says, you know, it's Darwinian, it's survival of the fittest. I'm just helping it along.
What? I was going to go for like a name, but I don't know what I can say without labeling this episode explicit. So insert name here. Insert bad name here for Rourke.
I mean, and he's the villain, and it's an attitude that people had, you know?
Yeah, like, definitely.
And probably still have.
Unfortunately, yes.
But I think one of the things that's really powerful about the support characters is that we actually get to see them switch sides. At one point, they are purely self-interested, and they're kind of like, we're not in charge, we're just here getting paid. So they kind of try to remove themselves, but they're still part of the problem. And then we see them go, actually, no, we can stand against the sort of big oppressive force and make the right choice. And you're never going to see Milo make that choice because he always has to believe in doing the right thing. And you're never going to see Rourke make that choice because he always has to do the wrong thing. So having support characters who can make that choice is kind of the thing that drives home the theme to the audience of like, you can make the right choice.
I was just like thinking about less good version of this movie where Milo is the self-interested one. And that's his character arc. I don't think that's as effective, though.
No.
Yeah, as him inspiring the people around him to change.
I mean, that's kind of Road to El Dorado, right?
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Support characters in this movie have been really well utilized to drive home the themes and what we want the audience living with, even though it's a white savior movie.
Look, Disney, live action remakes, you're doing so many of them.
Yeah, make this happen.
But
do it better.
Do it good this time.
I mean, I don't know how you do it as a not white savior movie. I feel like so much of the plot hinges on that.
Make Milo not white.
Yeah.
Or maybe, you know, maybe it's Kida's movie this time, you know?
Maybe. Yeah.
Should we do some takeaways?
Sure. All right. I didn't actually write down my takeaway. What were some of your takeaways?
All right, so I had, as we mentioned, we talk about D&D a lot on this podcast because we love D&D. Set up your side characters like a D&D party. Give them specific characteristics and skills. They all contribute in a different way. Give them one-on-one time with your protagonist, even if it's short.
Give them backstories.
Yes. I had a bite of backstory. That was my note. Like, it doesn't need to be big, long speeches. Like, we get, like, a few sentences and it's enough. Not easy to do. We talked about that in The Matrix. Like, the short version is so much harder than the long version. And if you can take them out of the plot and the movie still works, maybe they don't need to be there. They should be essential to your film.
I think I'd largely sit in the same takeaways. For me, probably the one that I'd add is just the idea of using your support characters to drive home the theme or to take the place of the audience in how they approach the thematic statement of the film, right? Like, it's the support characters who have to make the choice to do what's right over looking after their own interests. That allows your main character to be a good guy the whole time, if that's what you're after.
Yeah, I always like it when I'm like, oh, I haven't actually thought about doing that before. Because I'm always very like, the protagonist is the one that has to change.
Yeah. Well, because Milo does change, but his change is becoming brave.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
not a moral change. It's
he's there to protect from the beginning. Which you can do. Again, it's not always a protagonist I'm drawn to writing, but I'd like to. Even talking about Tom Holland. Like, Spider-Man is good and pure-hearted all the way through. Yeah. His change is about, like, identity in both of his movies. Maybe one day I'll write a protagonist like that.
Maybe.
They're good from the beginning, and then their character changes, becoming braver or more sure of themselves or something. Something wholesome. I might write something wholesome.
What? Who are you?
Not my first feature script about death and cannibalism.
What has this lockdown done to you, Kat?
Sometimes I write wholesome stuff.
When I hire you to write wholesome stuff.
That's true. That's so true.
All right. Well, that's Atlantis. Go back. Watch it if you haven't watched it in the 20 years since it came out. Despite its problems, I think there's still a lot to learn from it, and it still holds a place in my heart, if just for the genre itself. And
it's a beautiful movie. And they talked about, in a behind-the-scenes documentary, they were talking about how they worked out how Atlantis worked. Like, all the mechanics. It's not in the movie, they don't explain it, but just for them.
Well, just even, like, they came up with the language, and they brought in the guy who designed Klingon to design the language. But yeah, so there's all these little hidden details that they know because...
That's amazing.
They did heaps of world building.
And it shows.
Yeah. That was our episode on Atlantis and how to create memorable side characters. If you liked it and want to hear more, you can subscribe to us on YouTube or your podcast platform of choice. Upcoming episodes include The Emperor's New Groove and Avatar: The Last Airbender. If you'd like to support us even further, leaving a review or telling a friend about us helps us to grow the show and connect with new people. And that just kind of makes us feel warm and fuzzy. Until next time, this has been Kill the Cat.
Oh, this is so much easier in person.
I know, right?